Spin-offs really are a mainstay in our culture of entertainment. It seems like every wildly popular show or movie has had a spin-off in recent history. Some are much better than the originals, such as Frasier being a spin-off of Cheers, or how Better Call Saul is a spin-off of Breaking Bad. However, spin-offs are not just limited to television series. For example, the recent Mario movie is of course a spin-off of the series by the same name. The same series that is no stranger to an endless number of spin-offs, whether it be racing games or very well-made RPGs. This led me to what is likely my favorite genre of all time, fighting games. So because I was interested in researching spin-offs, I wanted to see what kind of spin-offs fighting games had. Were there any that were as prolific as some of the other series out there? For example, take Mario, Sonic, and James Bond. What do all three of these have in common? They all have very weird racing game spin-offs. And I am calling Mario Kart a weird racing game spin-off, because who in the late 80s looked at Mario and said, yeah, I definitely want to see this guy in a Miata in a few years. So I started looking at fighting games as a whole. Although there's nothing like a race game spin-off, spin-offs can of course take other forms. For example, you can golf with Mario, you can watch TV with Pikachu, and there's even a Final Fantasy game where you can run around with a gun. It's seriously just a game where you run around with a heater taking human life in Final Fantasy. But what do fighting games have? It seems like a fighting game would be ripe for a spin-off. But for fighting game spin-offs, we surprisingly have very few. For example, for King of Fighters, there was actually an Otome dating game called King of Fighter for Girls that came out a few years ago. And BlazBlue actually recently released an action roguelike game. This is what led me to my favorite series of all time, Street Fighter. It's a series that has definitely had its issues, but as a massive fan of fighting games, it's by far my favorite series. So I started looking at Street Fighter spin-offs, of which there's a surprising amount. A lot of them are pretty terrible mobile games, like Street Fighter Duel, which is a gacha game that I actually played and is very bad. But something pretty interesting is there's a mobile port of Street Fighter 4 that controls about as well as you would expect, but it's actually pretty fun. It feels more novel than anything, but it's part of Capcom's history in trying new things, which they have a very interesting history of doing. For example, in their non-mobile games, Capcom has done many fighting game spin-offs with other franchises. For example, most people in the fighting game community would of course know Street Fighter Cross Tekken or Marvel vs. Capcom. And another character you'll see in many of these games is of course Mega Man. For a long time, Mega Man and Street Fighter were Capcom's biggest franchises, and of course they're most often featured together in other fighting games. However, they also have a game that is a direct crossover as part of Mega Man's 25th anniversary, Mega Man Cross Street Fighter. I'm not a huge Mega Man fan myself, but this game is actually really good. It originally started as a fan game, and instead of threatening to sue some poor soul like Nintendo or more recently Valve might do, they actually brought this developer in to help fund the project as well as give feedback. It's essentially just Mega Man 1, but instead of fighting Mega Man bosses, you fight Street Fighter characters. As far as crossovers go, it's pretty expected to bring two of your own major IPs together, whether it be for this Street Fighter Cross Mega Man game, or for other crossover fighting games that Capcom has released in the past. But what about something that nobody would expect? Have you ever thought about what it would be like to play as 44th President of the United States in Street Fighter? No? In what is almost lost media today, Street Fighter Online Mouse Generation, released in April of 2008, was an online game controlled only with your mouse that featured Street Fighter characters alongside characters from Rival School and tie-in characters from Chinese novels and comics. This game really doesn't look any good at all, but I'd be interested in playing due to the novelty of it. But that's not the only novelty of this game. In a special Valentine's Day update, they even released a playable Barack Obama. That's right. You can play as famed president, public speaker, and Lockheed Martin enthusiast Barack Obama in Street Fighter, who apparently controlled just like Ryu. You can't really play this game at all anymore, and there are a few other Street Fighter games that you can't really play at all anymore. Another one is Street Fighter 03 Online, which is a Korean-only PC port of Alpha 3. It looked like it was free, and you could even customize your character similar to the way that you could in a Tekken game. And although it is unplayable right now, there is actually somebody working on bringing a playable version of this game, but it looks like that's still a long way away. Something else that is completely unplayable is Cannon Spike, a year 2000 shooter by Psychic for the Dreamcast. It retails for over $300 on eBay, so I got a legitimate copy of this game. Although not a true Street Fighter game, the NA and PAL versions of the game are of course named after Cammy's Cannon Spike ability, who is playable in this game alongside a not dead Charlie Nash. The game is almost like a Dreamcast version of Smash TV. Also featured is a fallen version of Balrog, or Vega, or Claw if you're nasty, but not featured is M. Bison Balrog, or Vega M. Bison. It's a fun shooter, but there isn't really that much depth to it. That's about the extent of notable Street Fighter spin-offs. There are of course other non-canon Street Fighter fighting games like Street Fighter EX, and there are plenty of arcade tie-ins like this Whack-A-Mole machine, or gambling tie-ins like slot machines or pachinko. But that's pretty much it. There are some things I didn't mention, like for example Street Fighter 2010, but I feel like I covered all interesting spin-offs. And although there isn't anything as interesting like a dating sim like King of Fighters might have, for Street Fighter, with the exception of Mega Man Cross Street Fighter, you seem to only really get these weird dead-on-arrival fighting games, with weird licensed characters like Barack Obama, or games that force you to play as Cammy, and we all know what that does to some of these guys. So right now, I think I'm happy with the mainline Street Fighter games as they are.